Chinese restaurants and postcards are a good fit because any successful restaurant depends on a good location, good food, and good decor. And postcards depict all those three things, especially with respect to Chinese foods such as chop suey or noodles, which were very popular starting around 1900. This is the Shanghai Low restaurant in San Francisco about 1913. Perhaps it's from the opening of the restaurant, shows a number of people in Western dress, perhaps the Low family, I expect. And here outside on Grant Avenue in San Francisco's Chinatown, we can see an overhead sign for the restaurant, which actually on the kind of lantern at the edge of the sign, the left-hand edge, advertises noodles and chop suey. Also has the Chinese characters for Shanghai. The restaurant did evolve over time, just like a lot of restaurants, they update their decor. And here is a Kurt Teich postcard from 1939, which advertises that restaurant as the most modern cocktail bar and lounge, beautiful scenic murals of China recently completed by Oriental artists. The Low family also diversified and opened a nightclub across the street, which is quite famous for its music and dancing and floor show. You can go on Google and find out more about that. A lovely, lovely Kurt Teich card, one of the best I've ever seen. The Chinese restaurants first started in San Francisco about 1850, and by 1900 they had evolved into a kind of standard form with round tables and small stools, perhaps sometimes rectangular tables, ornate woodwork helping divide the rooms, also murals on the wall, some lacquer work as in the bottom left-hand corner of this slide. This is from San Francisco, but mailed in 1903, and this restaurant was probably destroyed in the 1906 San Francisco earthquake. Here's a similar Chinese restaurant in Washington, D.C. that opened in 1905 in a former church building. It lasted until the 1930s, same type of decor with teak tables and inlaid pearl. Again, murals and a lot of fancy ornate woodwork on the walls. A similar restaurant, but in Minneapolis this time, mailed in 1906, the Mandarin restaurant, which advertised itself as the most characteristic American and Chinese cafe in the Northwest. In New York, one of the most popular restaurants in Chinatown was the Port Arthur restaurant. I don't know if it's related to the Port Arthur restaurant in Washington, D.C., but Port Arthur is a city in northeastern China famous for a naval battle where the Japanese decisively defeated the Russian fleet in 1905. And this shows the main dining room of the restaurant. You can see the same type of circular and round tables, and there's a note on the card that the person enjoyed the food and found the fruit delicious. In the background, we can also see some people towards the left-hand side, perhaps the owners or managers of the restaurant, obviously taking pride in their business. Quite a rare shot of a kitchen in a Chinatown restaurant. The restaurant owners surely wanted to project orderliness and cleanliness. Another rare card, and it has to be said that the Chinese restaurants just didn't serve a Native American population, but they also served the Chinese community for celebrations such as weddings and Chinese Lunar New Year. These children are probably dressed up to celebrate the Chinese Lunar New Year, which takes place in February. The card on the left talks about how the person bought this card in a Chinese restaurant last night, but calls it a tough haul, and that says that the food was worse than the grub they got in Buffalo. So there was a certain bias against Chinese people in the United States after 1850s. A lot of them were forced out of California. They went to other places such as New York City and the American South and other cities across the United States. The card on the right is of one of the main restaurants around 1900 in New York City's Chinatown. It's the Chinese Tuxedo Restaurant, which was next to the elevated railway, and quite a fancy dining room as well. You can see the bottom panel of the card. Reason I show that Chinese restaurant card on the right is that this is the message on the back of a Tux postcard with a picture of that restaurant. The message reads, "Dear Mother, went through Chinatown last night. It is an awful sight. This restaurant is where Elsie Siegel was murdered. Grace," mailing to her mother in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan. In fact, Elsie Siegel, who was a missionary to Chinatown and who also had a couple of Chinese lovers, she wasn't, it's believed, murdered at that restaurant, but another restaurant in Chinatown. But there was a real bias that had to be overcome by the people running the restaurants and people running other stores in Chinatown, such as curio shops and laundries. But gradually over time, that bias was overcome. People really liked coming to Chinatown. It was something exotic and interesting to do. People came in tour groups. Here's a picture of a group of tourists going to Chinatown from the Broadway and Times Square area. On the left-hand side of the card, it says, "We're going to Chinatown coach tonight at 8:30 or 11:30. So it really became quite popular and exotic. This is a picture of Chinatown at night. In the center is part of the sign for the Port Arthur restaurant, which we saw earlier. So people came to experience exotic things, the restaurants, the curio shops, the opium dens, the gambling dens. Must have been quite a sight at night. It's worth taking a look inside the Soy Key store, which was a curio shop, and imported goods store, which was right under the Port Arthur restaurant on the second floor. So let's go inside and look at a couple of the departments. This is the tea and coffee department. You can also see some porcelainware, such as teapots. Here's the silk and embroidery department. You can see some larger porcelainware, and also the staff of the restaurant in the background. By 1910, the Chinese restaurants were spreading quickly across America and could be found in many cities. And they also diversified what they offered. This one had a fine orchestra, besides also making chop suey as a specialty. And you can see that lots of white Americans came to dine there. It was mailed in 1910. Another card from Chicago of the Mandarin Restaurant, which advertised select American and Chinese bill of fare, also in the downtown area. So the Chinese were smart. They were offering a premium product. This is Detroit, about 1915, the Chinese Pavilion Cafe in the downtown area with prominent signs for chop suey. Like many other Chinese restaurants, they occupied the second floor of downtown buildings. Chinese Pavilion, Chinese Cafe, chop suey everywhere. Here's the Canton Cafe in Los Angeles. You can see it also had the opportunity, patrons had a chance for dancing, and there's a piano there on the left. Lots of nice murals and some plants to give it some more atmosphere. This is the Shanghai Cafe, also in Los Angeles, California, around that same period, 1913 and 1915. We can also see, as part of what I call the culture of homogenization of Chinese restaurants, menus on, I believe, what are menus on each table. This is a New York City Chinese tea parlor and restaurant outside of Chinatown. So there were hundreds of chop suey restaurants in um, New York City by the 1910s, by the mid 1910s. Not as fancy as the Port Arthur restaurant, but it's the same general decor of teak wood and inlaid pearl tables and ornate lacquer work on the walls. This is the Bunjan restaurant. The characters in the top right hand corner under the words Bunjans stand for authentic. This was one of the Chinese restaurants that was served as a nightclub in the Times Square area. It advertised itself as a most unique restaurant, the only one of its kind in the city. Excellent food, quick service, high-class music every evening. I love this card. It's showing dancing at the restaurant. Everyone's having a good time, happy to pose for the photographer. It's almost as if you're there when you're looking at this card. Of course, the Chinese restaurants, as they moved outside of Chinatown onto the main thoroughfares such as 6th Avenue, had a busy lunch trade. This restaurant, you could get a full meal for 35 cents, which I understand from a history of restaurants in New York City was quite a good value for the time. Again, the same form of tables and chairs, and also menus on the tables. These Chinese restaurants, would have paid a lower rent than if they were on the first floors. That is, being on the second floors, most of them were. And we can also see the proprietors and perhaps the head waiter in this shot. Another popular Chinese restaurant in the heart of the skyscraper district in Lower Manhattan had a seating capacity of 500 people. Lunch surely was a busy time. This is the Canton Tea Garden in St. Louis, Missouri. It advertised chop suey as its specialty. And this is the earliest Canadian card that I've been able to locate of the Mandarin Cafe in Kingston, Ontario. This is a Valentine Company card with murals on the wall, lantern style lamps for lighting, beginning of a kind of booth decor. When Prohibition came into effect in 1920, that had a particular effect on Chinese restaurants in major cities, because with their lower food and labor costs, they could move into these huge cabaret type restaurants that were forced to close because of Prohibition. They would be raided or and shut down by the government if they tried to serve alcohol. So we'll see some of these in the following slides, and you really can see just how large these venues were. On the left is a card mailed in 1911 from Churchill's restaurant at Broadway and 49th Street. And then on the right, you can see the successor at the same location called Yong's. Also, and it advertised best food at popular prices. It's really trying not to show how vast the space was, really the size of a basketball court. A couple more examples of restaurants really turning into large nightclubs and occupying that second floor space that the cabaret restaurants could no longer occupy. On the left is the Palais d'Or, formerly the Palais Royal, a space for entertainment and music. Again, on the right is the Chin Lee restaurant, also space for music, dancing, and entertainment. On the left is the Mandarin Cafe at 400 Grant Avenue. You can see a piano and some other musical instruments in the background on the stage. On the right is the Cathay restaurant in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, that advertised music and dancing. This, like other Chinese restaurants, occupied the second and third floors. One of my favorite cards is the one on the left for the China Garden restaurant in Hackensack, New Jersey. On the right is a card for the Nanking Cafe in Minneapolis, which that restaurant had opened in 1909. Lots of space for partying. One of the prominent nightclubs in Washington, D.C. was the Lotus Club. Here's a couple great Kurt Tike Company cards showing the space, showing the interior of the restaurant, the members of the floor show, also some of the musicians. It's significant that the musicians are shown as Black men. These were integrated restaurants. They didn't discriminate. And Chinese restaurants, of course, can be found then as today in many American and Canadian small towns and cities. The card on the left is a Kurt Tike card of the Pekin restaurant in Bangor, Maine, which advertised American Chinese food. So there's a turn away from just advertising chop suey, instead advertising Chinese American food. The card on the right is a lovely card of Lee's Chinese American restaurant in Manchester, New Hampshire. We can see the modernizing trend continue in terms of interior decor. The card on the left is a Kurt Tike card from 1935. The card on the right is a Kurt Tike card from 1941. It's the same restaurant, but we see the ornate woodwork disappear. We see the start of booth type seating. We see the floor being replaced. We also see modern, I think it's probably fluorescent style lighting. You can also see booth style seating in these two postcards from Atlantic City, New Jersey. One of the rules, so to speak, of Chinese restaurants is that you'll find them in places where tourists go, such as Atlantic City and Florida too. Here's a couple slides showing the booth style decor that many of us probably know very well. The card on the left is of the Kong Chow restaurant in Rutland, Vermont. And the card on the left is of the Pink Lantern restaurant in Medicine Hat, Alberta, which significantly also had jukeboxes on the wall. So after the Second World War, Chinese restaurants adapted to the growth of suburbs, more disposable income, and increased automobile use. Sometimes giant signs for them dominated the surrounding landscape. The Far East Imperial Restaurant on the left was in Pompano Beach, Florida, and the Golden Buddha Restaurant was in Sarasota, Florida. The Chayam, short for Chinese American Restaurant in Chicago, and Restaurant Shei Wong in Montreal had especially large pylon signs. Couldn't miss those if you're driving by there. San Antonio, Texas had the Tai Shan Restaurant, and Kingman, Arizona had the Jade Restaurant on the famous Route 66. On opposite coasts were Gangsu's Tea Garden in Porterville, California, and the Chinaland Restaurant in North Beverly, Massachusetts. Can't miss those signs, that's for sure. The Bamboo Inn was in Cornwall, Ontario, and Wong's Kitchen was in Swift Current, Saskatchewan. New Brunswick in Eastern Canada had Ming's Garden in Moncton and Ming's near Fredericton. The older Chinatowns with their bright neon displays at night also continued to draw customers after World War II. Shown here are images from New York City on the left and Boston on the right. These two circa 1950s postcards from the Rice Bowl restaurant on Mott Street in New York City's Chinatown are a particularly attractive combination. The card on the right was also a poster in the restaurant. This restaurant in Boston's Chinatown was opened in 1951 by Bob Lee, a native of Canton, China. It was called Bob Lee's Lantern House until 1960, when it was remodeled into a tiki bar. Tiki bar is another name for a Polynesian restaurant. There are postcard devotees of tiki bars. They're out there, I assure you. This is Vancouver, which has one of Canada's largest Chinatowns. Ming's restaurant advertised, quote, authentic Chinese dishes at moderate prices. Many wedding banquets took place there. You can also see on the left-hand card, the Bamboo Terrace restaurant. Chinese restaurants have reused the same names many, many times. Lychee Garden in Toronto's Old Chinatown and the Republic Restaurant in the Times Square area of New York City typify the 1960s decor of large urban Chinese restaurants. A lot of murals on the walls. Examples of 1960s decor in smaller Chinese restaurants are the Diners Rendezvous in Nanaimo, British Columbia, and the Shanghai Chop Suey restaurant in Winnipeg, Manitoba. Both restaurants served Canadian dishes such as steaks. The Shanghai Chop Suey restaurant in Winnipeg was under the same ownership for 70 years until it closed in 2011. Special mention should be given to New York City Chinese restaurants after the Second World War. That city probably has the most Chinese restaurants in the United States, perhaps because Chinese food qualifies as kosher food under Jewish dietary laws. Shown below are the Ben Yi and Midtown Chinese Rathskeller, a couple of Chinese restaurants from the 1950s. Some quite nice linen cards indeed. A couple more Chinese restaurants in the Midtown area, Chinatown Charlie, and the Lotus Eaters on Fifth Avenue. This is the second last, actually the last slide in my presentation. Change towards more authentic Chinese cuisine in Canada and the United States started coming in the mid-1960s with immigration reform that removed biases against Asians. In New York City, for example, Sheila Chang's Shanghai East restaurant, shown here, was able to hire 8 chefs from Taiwan. They could make marvelous Sichuan dishes, which was discovered by the New York Times. The end. So these cards, many of them are wonderful creations of postcard artistry, but they also show many things, family-run businesses. They show changes in American culture. They show changes in restaurant designs. So there's many interesting things that in them, and I've enjoyed putting together this collection. Happy to take any questions now.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Kyle. And they are absolutely beautiful cards. I think we would all agree on that. The colors are just so rich and wonderful. And so, yes, we have a few questions, so we'll go through them. This is from Hal. Wonderful to see the amazing postcard of the Chinese restaurant's kitchen. You just do not usually see a postcard view. I guess Hal was referring to the kitchen there. Okay, how did you find out the murder reference on that one card?
Well, it's from the, it's easy to Google that name on the internet. And so it was a sensational case at the time. They never found the man that they suspected of killing her.
Oh.
So.
Okay. And what is the oldest date? What is the oldest date postcard in your collection?
I think about 1900. It's not mailed, but it's a private mailing card, which dates it to about 1900.
Okay. Do any of these cards have menus or any other type of advertising on the back?
They will have advertising, such as, advertising excellent food or a nice decor, or dancing and music every night, something like that.
Yeah, I was thinking of, that was actually my question, and I was thinking of, how sometimes you would get hotel and restaurant cards and they would have a little menu on the back as well when you flipped it over. So there wasn't really a place for a message, there was just a menu there.
There are menu cards, but actually those are where the postcard is torn off the top of the menu, and you can find those on ocean liners. But generally, except for mentioning chop suey, the Chinese restaurants don't advertise the food served at a particular restaurant. The University of Toronto received a donation of a huge number of menus from a man named Harvey Spiller in Toronto, and so you can, if you're interested, go out to the U of T Scarborough and perhaps see those. That's another collecting area in terms of Chinese restaurants. Menus, also matchbook covers, but I think postcards are the best for depicting their story.
Okay, now, you said they were often, I think you covered this in the presentation, but I'll give it to you anyway. You said they often occupied the second floor. Why was
Yeah,
that?
the rents would have been cheaper for the second floor.
Okay.
So, and sometimes, they would expand into the third floor as well.
Yeah, I find it interesting that so many of them offered dancing as well. Was that just like a thing of the period?
Well, it's a thing of the period, and it's accentuated by prohibition, where they're
Okay.
able to move into those large nightclub cabaret type spaces, especially in New York City. And they had a good thing going with tasty food and music and dancing, and this was a successful business model for several decades.
It was probably a good thing for them to get more bodies in there as well, since they couldn't serve alcohol. It'd be a way, I guess, of attracting people in there as well, at least for the social interaction and whatnot.
Yeah.
Okay, more questions coming in. All right. Shaslow Restaurant, New York City, had an interesting ceiling fan stirring the air below. Remember which card that was?
That's about a halfway through.
It had either a double or a triple fan. It was just it's there. I have friends that are into ceiling fans, and
Alan, can you go back to that card? It's about halfway through.
It's the Chaslow, CHAS and then LOW.
Oh, I see him up here.
Oh, yeah.
Isn't that cool?
I've never seen
I
one like that
hadn't
before.
noticed that before.
Wow.
So they're in a small space, so they certainly need to work hard to circulate the air. So I can understand, why they would adopt something like that.
Sure.
It's an unusual design, though.
Yeah.
I've never seen one like that before.
Yeah, there's so many little interesting features about these cards, whether it's menus on the tables or the different types of ceiling lights they use, particular murals. Also, the restaurant owners and managers wanting to be in the cards as well in the early scenes. You don't really see that in the post-World War II cards.
No.
Next question.
How did your interest in this theme originate?
Well, I've collected New York City cards, and there are many Chinese restaurant cards that are part of that. And then I'm quite interested in Chinese history and culture because my parents were born there as the children of Canadian Methodist missionaries, the United Church of Canada. I've also, spent some time in China and have a grasp of the language as well. So it's a natural outgrowth of my interest in China and my New York City postcard collection. I should put in a plug for the annual Wichita show because I bought many of these there from one particular dealer who Hal and Alan know, who always has the best cards, Dennis Gorham.
Okay.
Many of these cards came from a man in Chicago who had collected restaurant cards for over 50 years. So these are cards. Many of these cards you will not see on eBay. They're definitely hard to find, but as a whole, they really do depict a cultural diaspora of Chinese Americans across the United States and Canada. And in the background are immigration laws that were difficult at times. And those immigration laws only started to be relaxed in the 1960s. Next question.
Yeah. On the Lotus Duo postcards, is the band illustrated an African American band?
I would think so. I mean, that's a clear message that it's an integrated restaurant, you know, and that it didn't matter whether you were white or yellow or black, you know. So the Chinese occupy during much of the time I've covered, you know, they occupy a middle space in the American racial spectrum. Sometimes that's a little uncomfortable, such as in the American South. The Chinese who went to the American South first worked as sharecroppers, but then they decided to open stores. So there would be a store that served the white people on the left-hand side of the road, and then there would be a store that served the black people on the right-hand side. You know, both operated by Chinese people.
There was a Chinese restaurant established in 1930 in Brockville, and it closed in 2020. There are some modern cards of it. Story on line March 2020. So that's from Shirley.
Yeah, I haven't seen those Brockville cards, but I was able to find a good selection of cards from across Canada. There are Chinese restaurants in all the provinces. I did not find any in the Yukon or Nunavut. There's some on Harry Holman's PI website of a couple in PI. There was also at the Skyline Motel in St. John, Newfoundland, you could get Chinese food. So that reflects that there's Chinese communities in all provinces across Canada. You know, they're enterprising people, and the Chinese restaurants for some of these people, you know, were a good business venture. They didn't come rich, they didn't become wealthy perhaps, you know, but they were able to raise families, and hopefully some of those children became doctors or help them with social mobility.
Well, you know, this may not necessarily be indicative of the Chinese populations in the different provinces, but are there some provinces where you have found more Chinese restaurant cards than others?
In Ontario, I would say are the most Chinese restaurant cards, and some of those are related to border towns. They're trying to attract, I think, tourists coming through, you know, on their way perhaps to cottage country. So I found cards of Fort Erie and Sault Ste. Marie and Windsor, those type of border towns. Also, I had one of the Bamboo Inn in Cornwall. The difficulty in Canada with Chinese restaurant cards is there isn't the same kind of massive energy in that the population centers aren't as big. many, like, there's hardly anything from Toronto because the restaurants in Chinatown were very small affairs. You know, that they didn't seem to have any need to advertise on postcards. If something they might advertise with were matchbook covers, and so people would buy those, to light their cigarettes. And the Chinese restaurant in Milton, Ontario, that my family frequented in the 1960s, did sell matchbook covers, but I couldn't find any postcards of that particular restaurant. There just isn't the same critical mass in Canada, but there are enough if you look hard. And such as the cards that I found in New Brunswick. There was another one that a couple more I didn't show from New Brunswick, and a few more from Nova Scotia, but they're out there, but there's just not the same number of them as in the United States. So it's partly immigration, it's partly the population of Canada. In the United States, starting in 1915, after a court case, it was much easier for people wanting to open a Chinese restaurant to emigrate. They were classified as merchants after that court case in 1915. So there were white Americans who would help sponsor them, and so many people came that way. And there's a historian named Heather Lee in New York City who's documented that process in New York City where many people came. But it was harder to emigrate in Canada. People came as paper sons, which refers to a young male person would impersonate someone who was dead, to take their place in Canada. And there was the head tax as well in Canada, and Chinese people until the 1960s had to carry immigration cards, carry identity cards, which they hated. So it's a window into America and Canada, and immigration policies. It's a window into restaurant design. It's a window into cultural homogenization. It's also a window into the different types of postcards produced, from the period 1900 to 1960, whether they're private mailing cards or white border cards, linen cards, chrome cards. The cards are good because, number one, there's salespeople going out and working to get the business of these and other restaurants. And number two is that the people running these restaurants cared about the image that they were going to project to the public. That Kurt Tyke card of the Shanghai Low restaurant is just superb. Enormous amount of work went into that. The inset on the lower right hand corner of the restaurant manager or owner is very unusual for a postcard, particularly of linen postcards, which don't reproduce face as well. So all in all, it's an engrossing topic if you just if you let yourself if you let your mind wander and think about the different aspects. It's engrossing. Unfortunately, I was not able, and I apologize to my friends in Wichita. I could not find a Wichita, Kansas Chinese restaurant postcard. Many mea culpas.
Okay. Few people said they want to look through their collections now and see if they have something like this. Somebody has a question here on matchbooks. I have a few of them, many still with matches. I have cut some of the matches out for safety. What is the best collecting practice? for them?
I do not collect matchbooks, so I cannot answer that question with any authority.
I do
So-
collect the matchbooks, and I just acquired this one in my mail. I've been away for a few days, but it's an earlier Wichita one. And I know that because there's only 5 digits in the phone number, as well as on the inside of the matchbook, it says keep them flying. So this would be a part of the 1940s, the war years. It's a beauty nook. And what's I wanted to show with this is how we flatten them out. I do take out the matches in my collection. So I collect the matchbook covers. And if you look on eBay or something, you can see full matchbooks and you can see covers like I'm collecting here. I do also take out the matches because of the sulfur content, and you hear things about fires and maybe a mouse would come and eat your match and set your house on fire. I hopefully never will have that happen, but anyway, with a knife to pry that old staple, get both ends straight up so you can force the staple out, and then the whole match part of it just you can discard and throw away, and then straighten out the matchbook and put some weight on it, and over time they get nice and flat like this. And it's just like it's another hobby. It's just like postcards. There are pages made for this size matchbook, and for the double size. This is the 20 size. I won't go into the depths of that, but anyway, it's a fun go with hobby to document state and local history along with the postcards.
Thank you very much, Hal. That was really helpful. I didn't know any of this. Have you ever encountered Canadian restaurant cards from every province? I really enjoyed seeing the period decor from the prairie-based cards.
Yes, I don't have any actual cards from PEI, but I have cards from all the other provinces. You can find the PEI cards on Harry Holman's PEI postcard website. And that particular restaurant, I think, was in Summerside. Again, you can find Chinese restaurants and tourists can often be found together.
Somebody here says, thanks for a great presentation, Kyle, and for pointing out all the avenues for discovery that this collection offers.
You're most welcome. Thank you.
A couple of other people, thank you for the great presentation.